Right, well, good evening, councillors. Good evening, members of the public, both near and watching us from afar. Councillors, this evening we are debating something which has been called a once-in-a-lifetime decision. It's one of those decisions which we make which will affect everyone in the borough, in fact, actually everyone in the county. So can we take just a few moments of reflection on the importance of the decisions that we are making this evening? Right, thank you, councillors. Please sit down. Right, members, I'll go through very briefly our usual formats. Remember that we are live streaming. Please don't say things that will upset your granny. We all know how to vote. The one on your left is yes, the one in the middle is abstain, and the one on the right is against. Please obviously indicate by raising your arm when you wish to speak, and we will pick you up and obviously keep you going as quick as we can. I think we know the fire exits are there, there, and there. I hope the debate won't be so fiery as to want us to use it, but we never know. Should it happen, although I doubt it will happen this evening, that we can all agree something by acclamation, I will do so. Speeches, as you know, are timed at 4 minutes and you get a 30-second warning. And if you're making points of order, please tell me which law or rule of the council you think has been broken. And if you wish to make a point of personal explanation, please note it can only be about something that you have previously said in this room in this debate. So, with that little homily, we will move on to apologies for absence. Democratic Services Manager.
I have apologies for Councillor Keane.
Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is declarations of interest. Before I ask for any, the monitoring officer would like to address you about dispensations.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to advise Council about councillors' disclosable pecuniary interests, which could potentially arise from item 6 on the agenda this evening regarding local government reorganisation. Council has granted the monitoring officer, through the scheme of officer delegations at paragraph 2.4.10, the authority to grant dispensations in respect of disclosable pecuniary interests in accordance with the Localism Act 2011. I have exercised my authority to grant a general dispensation to all councillors to participate in and vote on the issues on the agenda this evening, submission of any proposal to the Secretary of State under the provisions of the Local Government and Public Involvement in Health Act 2007. This dispensation allows all councillors to discharge the function of responding to the invitation to submit proposals for local government reorganisation, notwithstanding any disclosable pecuniary interest you may have. Thank you.
Councillors, in addition to what you have been told, does anyone else wish to declare an interest? Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to declare an interest in Surrey County Council by virtue of being an elected member of that council. I attended their meeting earlier today and participated and voted on similar matters that this council is considering this evening. Despite that, of course, I come to this meeting with an open mind, interested in hearing the debate and all points raised this evening before determining my own vote. I'm sure there are other county councillors in the room, of course, as well.
If any Surrey County councillors would like to join in that, please just indicate. We won't ask you all to speak. Thank you very much indeed. We've got you all. Okay, we'll now move on to questions from members of the public. And I understand Mr. Ruth wishes to ask a question and would like to read it out himself. So, Mr. Ruth.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I thank the leader, as a current leader of council, for answering the question of a former leader of an adjoining council. I thank you for your response in explaining the objective and process of the local government reorganisation and for publishing the detailed reports before the weekend. I've now read those reports, and I also viewed and listened to the debate this morning at the Surrey County Council. So much has been said and written about localism, and the Minister's letter of the 5th of February requests local leaders to ensure, with engagement with local residents and rewiring their relationship with town and parish councils. Therefore, I ask you, Leader, to give immediate consideration of the relationship between the proposed unitary authorities and the residents, and in particular the town and parish councils, and come forward with widespread consultation and readiness for consideration of this whole issue of localism for the Borough of Waverley and the unitary authorities in advance of the submission of the council's proposals to the Minister. I think it's on the 9th of May. Thank you very much.
Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Ruth. I made the correct assumption that there could only be one Tony Ruth, and it was probably the one that I would remember. So I'm very pleased to find that I was correct. A number of issues there. Firstly, just to note, you've obviously had the written response in terms of the first question. So I'm just going to respond to the supplementary question here. The meeting I actually had just before this one at 5 o'clock was with a meeting of the towns and parish clerks and lead members of the towns and parishes of Waverley. I think there was about 2/3 in attendance, which certainly included certainly the big 4 or 5, as well as a number of the smaller towns and parishes as well. I am, I think, the only leader of a principal authority that is also a serving parish councillor, and in my case, a serving leader of a council. I'm also the leader of Godalming Town Council as well, which meets thankfully in this room. Otherwise, I'd be all over the place. Waverley is somewhat unique, not completely, but we are fully parished, and we are bordered by a number of boroughs that are nearly fully parished, obviously with some notable points where they're not parished. In your old borough, for example, the town centre is not, and of course Woking, the town centre, is not parished. Once you go further north than that and further east, actually there's not a lot of towns and parishes at all, and actually a lot of the debate in the last few weeks has triggered concern and thinking amongst areas that are not parished as to whether they should start thinking about being parished, particularly as the power to do that, a community governance review, sits with the extant districts and boroughs, and one would presume with the new unitaries that would succeed them. I think personally that it's an incredibly important point that we maintain a good relationship with the most local element of our community. And you'll hear from me later about why I'm supporting the most local variation of the unitary configuration that is possible in order to complement that. I voted this morning at the County Council for proposals that tried to strengthen the county's proposition in that field, particularly recognising towns and parishes, recognising the different forms of community relationships that could exist or evolve, and also making sure that perhaps things like local committees, which were abolished by the council and work in some places but not everywhere, I will concede that straight away, might be a viable thing for us to re-explore again at the unitary level for those of us that are involved in that process. And obviously nobody here knows whether they will be or not. So from my point of view, it is already something that is front and centre of my mind here. Because I'm an elected town council leader, it is also front of my mind when I'm in the Surrey Leaders Group meetings. We're seeking a meeting with SALC to discuss the proposals they've put forward, and it is certainly my absolute intent, and I hope this is something that the county will also agree with me on, and I think they do in this case, that whatever goes forward to government on May the 9th not only needs to deal holistically with the transition and with the unitary proposals, but it does need to properly articulate the unitary area relationship with our towns and villages right across Surrey. And also, I mean, dealing with some outliers like Woking, for example, whatever their desire right now to create a Woking Town Council, if they had it, they couldn't do it if they wanted to, because it would require discretionary spend that their commissioners wouldn't allow. So there are some nuances across the county that we need to address. So I hope that has answered as fully as possible from me, but it is obviously something that is very important to me. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Leader. The next item is item 5, questions from councillors. I believe there are none. So we will move on to agenda item 6. But before we do so, I have a confession to make. I do not subscribe to social media, and so sometimes I'm not fully up to date in what is trending. But I do have a circle of friends, and strangely enough, the odd enemy, who keep me apprised of significant events that affect this council. It is clear that feelings are running very high over the proposed response from Waverley and the other councils to the government's plans for devolution, with many accusations of party political bias. It has been billed as a once-in-lifetime remodelling of local government. But with many of us in this chamber being over 50 years of age, it is in fact the second that some of us have experienced. However, being a little optical, that should not lessen our focus on the importance of this issue. And so it would be beneficial if we could all view this through the prism of what we truly believe is the best solution for our residents. Although I know it will be difficult for some, please can I make a plea to either support or attack the proposal and not the person during what might be a feisty debate. The monitoring officer would now like to say a few words.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to take the opportunity to provide some advice to Council. Firstly, I wanted to apologise on behalf of officers for the late distribution of Appendix 1 and Appendix 2 to the report. I'm sure members will be able to appreciate that production of the appendices involved a significant amount of work from officers across Surrey, and that work was ongoing until Friday when the documents were published. I'd like to reassure councillors that the Local Government Act 1972 provides that the agenda, including an item, must be published 5 clear working days in advance of a meeting, which it was, and therefore the late distribution of the appendices is lawful. Secondly, I hope that 4 days has given members sufficient opportunity to fully consider the report and appendices, but if any member considers that they've had insufficient opportunity to consider the papers, they should advise the Mayor this evening. Councillors will note that the matter before you this evening is unusual in that it is ultimately a decision to be made by the Executive by virtue of being an executive function. However, to ensure engagement with the whole Council and to promote democracy, particularly in the light of there being insufficient time for overview and scrutiny to consider the matter, the whole Council now has the opportunity to debate the matter this evening and to make a recommendation to the Executive to be taken into account by them when making their resolution. The Executive are due to meet at 8:30 this evening to consider the Council recommendation and make a resolution. That meeting will start no earlier than the scheduled time of 8:30 p.m, but subject to that, will start at the conclusion of this meeting, which may be later than 8:30 p.m. Just to clarify, the report on the agenda this evening is a report of officers from the Chief Executive. And to clarify, there are 2 appendices. Appendix 1, at pages 3 to 22, is known as Part A of Appendix 1, and it relates to a document supported by the leaders of each of the 12 councils in Surrey. Part B1 of Appendix 1 is found at pages 23 to 70 and is the draft interim plan prepared by and supported by the leaders of the 11 district and borough councils in Surrey. And Part B2 of Appendix 1 can be found at pages 71 to 106 of the supplementary agenda pack and is the draft interim plan prepared and supported by the leader of Surrey County Council. Appendix 2 at page 107 of your supplementary agenda pack is the letter received from the Minister by all Surrey Council leaders dated the 5th of February 2025. The recommendation of officers within the report published prior to the appendices being finalised asks Council to note Appendix 2 and to consider all documents in Appendix 1. I believe that the leader this evening, who will be moving a motion for Council to consider, will be encouraging councillors to consider all documents within Appendix 1, but to recommend to the Executive that they resolve that the leader submits Part A and Part B1, i.e. the district and borough's proposal, to government for their consideration. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. I now understand the Joint Chief Executive would like to say a few words before we move into the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, councillors. I'll keep this brief because I know there's a lot to discuss tonight. But tonight you'll be discussing our interim proposition, as the monitoring officers just set out, which will be sent to the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. As a reminder, we in Surrey are operating to extremely tight timescales, the tightest of any region in the current process. Government have asked for sight of our interim proposition by the 21st of March, that's Friday, and our final proposal by the 9th of May. We have not set this timetable, but we do need to abide by it. It's really important that we have this conversation. As the Mayor has set out, the current system has been in place for just over 50 years, the two-tier system of government. What we have here is a once in a generation, not lifetime, once in a generation opportunity to do the right thing, not just for Waverley, but for Surrey as a whole. The process we went through to pull this paper together has involved rigorous evidence-based analysis. As officers, we wanted to put you all in a position where you can make evidence-based decisions on the right way forward as much as is possible within the timescale. So you have our draft proposition, and before giving up the microphone, I just wanted to express my thanks to officer colleagues at Waverley and Guildford, as well as officer colleagues across districts, boroughs and county. We've all worked hard together to a very tight timescale, and I wanted to personally thank them all, including those who are in the chamber today. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro. Right, we're now going to move into the debate, but before I ask the leader to move the motion, are there any questions of clarity? And I understand clarity about the motion. Please, we do not want to get into a debate, but if there is anything that is confusing you, please speak now. Very well. We have a very...
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. Yes, you may not have seen my hand there.
Sorry, carry on, councillor.
Just to clarify then that the recommendation to council at 2.0 on page 6, where it says 2.1.2, that is changed, yeah? And instead of saying Appendix 1, it should say Part A and Part B1. Interim plan is ours. Is that B1? No, the Part B is theirs. There's Surrey's, isn't it?
Leader?
I think technically speaking, until I've moved it, it hasn't changed, though it is my intention to move alternate wording, which I'm very happy to read out at the point that I introduce it, Jerry. But until I introduce it, I haven't introduced it, sadly.
Okay. Do you mind if I just ask one other point for clarity or correctness? Because I've got a concern that on page 55, it says that we could get an extra 2% and that's 2.5 million. And by my sums, it's 25 million. And it makes a little bit of a difference to what we're talking about. If you could just check that. So this is on page 55 on what I've got in front of me. Could be a different number by your papers for all I know. Halfway down, reorganisation means 2 million. I think it's about...
I'm sure that will be picked up in the debate, but we're moving away from clarity.
I was hoping someone could check it before we get to the point of debating the numbers and things, so that we don't have to go backwards at that point. Gives you a chance to check now if you would like to, but it's about £1 billion, the tax base, isn't it? The amount raised. Mm-hmm.
Richard, would you like to pick that up?
Yes, very happy to. So it's 2% of the annual increase. So it is 2.5 million rather than 25. It's the difference between increasing on an annual basis by 5% rather than 3%. So that is the correct answer.
Are there any more questions for the leader on clarity? Very well, Leader. Would you like to move the motion? And I'll then make sure you have a seconder before you lead into debate.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I shall read it in full so it's very clear what I am moving, and I shall, if I'm saying it too fast, please somebody stop me. Firstly, the first point, that Council notes the letter from Government on 5th of February 2025 inviting all councils in Surrey to submit an interim plan for local government reorganisation by the 21st of March 2025 and a full proposal by 9th of May 2025, Appendix 2, and then this is the bit that is different, that Council considers the joint interim local government reorganisation plan, Appendix 1, and recommends to the Executive that Part A and Part B1, brackets proposal of the districts and boroughs for 3 unitary authorities, be submitted by the Leader of the Council to the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government by March the 21st, 2025. And I do believe I have a seconder.
Do you have a second?
Happy to second. Thank you.
Do you wish to speak at the end of the Leader's comments, or do you wish to reserve your position?
Reserve my position, please.
Thank you very much, Leader. You may move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, can I thank all of the officers who worked on the LGR material right across Surrey and at all councils. Waverley and Guildford have, of course, certainly put in their share, but certainly it's not just Waverley and Guildford that have. I would also like to thank the other 10 district and borough leaders, also the Leader of the county, and in particular the Leader of Guildford Borough Council, Julia McShane, who's been alongside with me at every step during these debates. Secondly, it is my intention to follow the will of council this evening. I had hoped this could legally be a decision that we could take here together, but as an executive function, that is not the case. Thirdly, let me address something that has ended up being part of my week and has a danger of becoming a toxic part of the debate today in lieu of the substance. I did that very silly thing that politicians at any level do on some occasions. They ended up becoming the story. I favour unitaries as a concept. I've never put any secrecy on that, but I favour 3 unitaries because I believe that a more local authority is better for residents. I believe that I'm a pretty straight shooter when it comes to my views on things, especially important things like this, and I completely concede that my choice of words when talking to my Chief Executive at the Waverley Executive last week in regards to LGR was clearly ill-chosen. But to be clear just to everybody in this room, just as in a court where the tone and presentation of the argument is almost as important as the evidence itself, this is also clearly the case when it comes to communicating any proposals to the government, and particularly complicated proposals. The very clear direction from the majority of D&B leaders, just as the clear steer that has come from Surrey County Council leadership to its officers in regards to its proposal, was that the evidence clearly supports 3 unitaries and that the tone of the report and the words of the proposals needed to explicitly convey that point and convey it clearly to the government. Now, I've obviously opened myself up to any of the flack and silliness and all the rest of it that comes from that. That's on me. But I want
Could
to
I hold you for 1 sec?
Yes, of
Councillor
course.
Monroe is waving. No? In due course. Wave in due course then. I shall not have seen you.
I may need 30 seconds of my, or some of my time back though. Okay. But I do want to just apologise to any members, residents for any confusion, misunderstanding or other issue that has arisen from this. But the evidence from this pack, from the districts and boroughs, clearly does speak for itself, which is why it was noted completely unanimously by the County Council earlier today. The incredibly short process that we have had to go through here is, I think, an incredibly serious risk to services and to vulnerable people in particular. And it didn't need to be that way. This might be a government policy, but the County Council jumped at the chance to do it. And I have to say, I consider that to be one of the more reckless calls in this process. But we are where we are with that now, and we need to move forward and try and make the best of it. But when this is normally done, this on average takes years. And as you've heard from the Chief Executive, this process has been done so far in a matter of about 8 weeks, with the next part of the very serious process to happen by May the 9th. Let us start with a problem. None of these unitaries can be incorporated on day one at present without a plan to resolve the debt issues of Woking, Spelthorne and others, including the county. In practice, everything we say here about these bids and any specific proposals or arrangements of geography presumes that those elements are sorted out first, because literally no combination of unitaries, single, double or triple, can function without dealing with that debt. And the financial issues that are, of course, poisoning this debate are the direct consequences of the last 15 years, but also, of course, cuts in those councils that have then caused reckless behaviour in places like Woking and Spelthorne, whose debt now pollutes this county and indeed all of the debate that comes forward from it. Because instead of talking about the things that matters, we're continuously talking about money and debt. The county focuses on 500,000 population, despite being told by ministers at least twice this was negotiable, a point clearly understood by Essex and Hampshire and Sussex, and indeed so far everyone other than Surrey. Proposing such massive territories in some cases cuts across economic hubs, creates unfocused growth, with certain councils having to consider rural and urban drivers pulling in opposite directions at the same time. These are what I refer to as councils stretching from Staines to Hazelmere or Farnham to Oxted, depending on which model that you look at. The county bid also just has 2 elected members for such massive divisions, and I think in Waverley that resonates more than many other places. It will create considerable caseload. But beyond that, 2 massive unitaries and the abolition of hundreds of councillors and the abolition of the local councils and the connections to the community that go with them is, I think, a special form of localism that only the county council seems to be able to understand. And frankly, I think it will mean that it will be even more unrepresentative, as those who work or have children or caring responsibilities will be further unable to undertake such vast responsibilities in this manner. The financial modelling of the county bid is a combination of strange and farcical, and I know Mark is going to take a lot of this up further, but the county have packed costs onto their unitary bids for 3 unitaries to make that point. They have assumed the complete replication of all tier 1 to 5 staff at the cost of £45 million onto their unitaries. This is completely ridiculous. The county is already split up into quadrants and areas of note for some of the core services, and most of the frontline staff will 2p. I accept there is a need to recreate some statutory roles and senior officers, but not 500 roles. It's ridiculous. There is also a number of areas that the white paper, they don't touch at all. They don't touch housing, they don't touch growth, they don't touch population figures, they don't touch localism. This whole process could have been so different. Also, things like economies of scale. The county council is currently bigger than even their 2 unitary proposal. Either the economies of scale are there and they have got them and they are still broke, or even as a county council, they weren't able to leverage them, even being bigger than the 2 unitaries that they're proposing. This whole process could have been different. What we have here is a D&B proposal that's backed up by the majority of the 151 officers in this county. What we could have been talking about is a proposal for the next 50 years and not a proposal that is completely mired in the financial circumstances of 2025. And it is my hope going forward that we can work together with our fellow councillors and councils to do just that. And that, Mr. Mayor, is where I will end and move my recommendations.
Thank you. The floor now is available. You wish to speak? Councillor Atkins. Sorry, I'll get it right one day.
Thank you, Mayor, Councillor Ward. I have an amendment which I have forwarded earlier. If that, could I move the amendment, please?
You may. This is Waverley. Okay, can we just pause a sec while it's handed round, and we
Thank
won't
you.
take it out of your time. Councillor Reid?
Mr. Mayor, I don't want to speak at the moment, but unfortunately, at my great age, I cannot read that as it was. Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I think that another councillor was going to speak immediately, but and you.
Thank you very
chucked
much,
into the back.
Jerry. I will
Councillor
run this
Munro's been
meeting.
forgotten here, I think. Should he
I
speak
will
while this
run
happens?
this meeting.
I'm very happy for Councillor Munro to speak now.
I'm quite happy for you to speak now.
Mr. Mayor, could I propose 5 minutes adjournment just for us all to at least read this, let alone absorb it? It's quite a lot of words.
That seems perfectly reasonable. Will 4.5 minutes do? Thank you. Councillors, have you all had time to read, if not inwardly, totally digest? Very well. Councillor Austin, do you have a seconder?
Please to second, Mr Mayor.
And Councillor Coburn, do you wish to speak immediately after the proposer or reserve your position?
Reserve my position, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Austin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Unitary restructuring is a huge opportunity. A single tier structure means more clarity for residents, more direct accountability, greater efficiency, stripping out current unnecessary bureaucracy and duplication. We have two submissions in front of us. Both make arguments which resonate with us all. Both are acknowledged as interim, and both do not provide us with detailed assumptions they made to make their case. Right now, Surrey County Council delivers the majority of these services and has done so for the last 50 years. Their numbers are stated on published planned expenditure, for example. That's what they've used. For those services, we pay 74% of our council tax and correspondingly only 13% to the borough. The D&B submission we sadly must now view in the context of the clip which came to light last week. The credibility of the report has since been called into question by many councillors across Surrey. But I shall now focus and not skew the conversation back, because we need to get this important decision right for our residents who simply want their council tax to be spent wisely and services to be delivered efficiently. On localism, I think we need to be honest, because to suggest that 3 unitary authorities of 400,000 will realistically deliver a more local service than 2 of 600,000 is to kid ourselves. Residents don't necessarily have an affinity with Waverley or Surrey Council. They just want service delivery and efficiency. Driving localism will happen by unlocking further devolution and meaningful partnerships, by modernising and creating efficiencies. The Surrey report discusses in much more detail this. Joint partnership working, collaboration, engaging with towns and parishes, community boards. The D&B submission does not touch really on how to deliver localism, other than it discusses retaining civic mayors. As a parish councillor myself, I highly value the contribution of our network of parish and town councils. We now have an opportunity for them to seize more responsibility and, for example, take control of assets and responsibilities, which I very much hope they do. On service delivery risk, as the portfolio holders for adult social care and children's services made very clear today, moving beyond a 2 unitary framework increases risk, disaggregation risk, fragmentation risk, commissioning risk. We must continue to take our responsibilities here very seriously. On finances, both submissions make very clear the significant financial savings come from the 2 unitary format. Over a 5-year time window, the D&B report says a £75 million saving. But the Surrey report concerningly states a 3 unitary structure would make a loss of £146 million. The 3 unitary option does not satisfy government requirement that the structure must be financially sustainable. Debt. All 12 leaders agree debt is a huge issue. The 3 unitaries mean we will likely be tied in with Woking. Fortress building attempts by the leader in this corner of Surrey may put us at serious risk of financial exposure to its £2.2 billion debt if no county-wide solution is found to deal with it. This is a serious issue and we must deal with it. I therefore recommend Part B2, the Surrey submission, as it most fully satisfies the brief and offers the best outcome for Waverley residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Munro, I'm sorry to have to shut you off, but I was aware that there was going to be a major opposition amendment, and so I held you. Do you wish to speak to the amendment first, sir?
Yes, thank you. No offence in the world, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I was trying to get in before the amendment because I wanted to give my thoughts on a slightly wider thing. So maybe I can say what I was going to say anyway, and you'll rule me out of order if you wish. I do think what I hear of this debate so far, and we've got a long way to go, I don't think it's actually touched the real heart of the problems. And I think there are a number of even more important aspects than whether there's 2 or 3 unitaries. Incidentally, I go slightly in favour of 2. Far more important is the role of mayoral strategic authorities. I do accept that there has been very little time, and I'd like to also congratulate officers and indeed local politicians in putting their shoulder to the wheel and getting this far here. But nevertheless, I think the reports in front of us really do not pay nearly enough attention to the role of the MSAs, mayoral strategic authorities. They, he, she will be far more important, frankly, than anybody else in this county in delivering local services. I'm sure this has been thought of, but I would like to see some recognition in the report that goes in 2 days' time, if it's possible, that this is the real crux. I'm particularly concerned that although the MSA is envisaged to take control of transportation, police and crime, etc., it is not going to be responsible for adult services and children's services. These are literally life and death services. If we get it wrong, people really will die. And therefore, it should be in the absolute forefront of our minds. And I don't see that in this report. Secondly, debt. I'm very reassured by the remarks made so far that the debt of the let me call it the 2 pariah authorities, that's Spelthorne and Woking, not the fault of the current administration, it's their previous administrations, are really going to be very serious indeed. I would like to have seen this report saying if the debt is not sorted, then there's no deal at all. And I'm not at all impressed by, frankly, weasel words by government in the letter by the minister. And as far as I could understand, what he's basically saying is you're on your own here, chum, with debt. And I think we should push even harder at this stage. I think that 2 unitaries has to be, on balance, the better solution. And harking back to my earlier remarks about life and death services, I do remember having been around a fair time. Berkshire did roughly the same thing as we're going to do now, and they had to row back from their 4 unitaries and actually combine those unitaries together in order to have adults and children's services which actually functioned effectively. And to function effectively, you need mass. You need a proper hierarchy, you need specialisms, you need really high-grade people to lead it, etc., etc. All this leads to having large services, and I don't see this here. I'm not going to put in a formal amendment, there's no time, but I would ask the leader to hoist this in, and if possible, amend the document in the 2 days that are available. I'm intending to abstain, I think, but let's hear the debate.
Thank you, Councillor. I now have Councillor Clark. I'm sure I don't need to remind you, but I'll say it for everybody else. We are focusing currently on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. P5 full thumb. It's the second time in as many meetings that I smell something fishy. At our last council meeting, we were treated to an amendment on car park charges, which I referred to as a battered and refried red herring. This time, we have an amendment that is something more akin to a jellyfish. It stings for a while, but it's spineless. We all know what happens to jellyfish. They all end up washed up on the seashore. But seriously, regarding Surrey County Council's current performance, there is only one thing worse than one dysfunctional council, and that's two. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Nicholson, followed by Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I support both the proposals for a 3-unitary council and also for 3 members per division. Actually, I've been a supporter of some form of a unitary council for a number of years, given the amounts of complaints I've had over the years about people not understanding a 3-tier system. Actually, these unitary councils are not revolutionary. They're merely completing a process which started in 1986 with the abolition of the GLC and the metropolitan counties. And recently I was asked a question about unitary authorities and mentioned the GLC. And the man said, "Ah, yes, wasn't the GLC that big building on the South Bank? I have read about that." And I realised he would have been about 5 at the time it was abolished. And I also remember seeing on television Labour councillors in the north of England praising Margaret Thatcher. Why? She proposed the abolition of the greatly disliked metropolitan counties and restored the previous powers to the unitary metropolitan county boroughs. So currently, all of Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales have unitary councils, plus virtually all the north of England, the English city areas and a lot of the west of England. So this is a catch-up. And so there's now a template for all situations. And there is recent templates for a split county. Cumbria was split equally into Cumberland and Westmoreland. And if you go back a little further, you have Cheshire being split into Cheshire East and Cheshire West and Chester. So the government can look back at these sort of things and work and use them. Now, getting back to what we were talking about, looking at the 3 district proposals, there's certainly a sense and place and identity about them. When the eastern unitaries of Tundridge, Reigate and Banstead, Epsom and Ewell and Mull Valley, a neat square shape covering the eastern downs. And then good transport links north, south, east, west. And the North West Authority covers the suburbia of Surrey, the Low Heathlands, plus the emerging Thames Valley. Again, a specific area. Again, good transport links. And again, a place of identity. And the final authority, the Surrey Hills. This jigsaw between Waverley and Guildford. If you look at the borders, it's an absolute jigsaw. And of course, Woking has to be added to provide the correct number of people. So in terms of numbers of councils, 3 per division produces a 78 figure, which is an excellent fit with the Boundary Commission analysis of numbers. Now, turning to the 2 Surrey proposals, which is the amendments, neither of them have quite the same sense of identity. You merge different areas together, but particularly in the West. And if you have 2 councillors per division, that's a lot of work for people. It's difficult for them to, I think, to operate on that number. So finally, I hope that the person or persons who make the decision about this have a good understanding about the terrain of Surrey, because that is the key. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have Councillor Martin, followed by Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It doesn't need a rocket scientist or a brain surgeon or indeed a fish expert to tell us that 3 unitaries will cost more than 2. The district and boroughs report confirms this. Their B1 report on page 54 says that after 2 years of transition and 5 years of operation, cumulative net savings for 2 unitaries is £100 million. But for 3, it's just 24 million, a difference of 76 million. 3 costs way more than 2, the evidence says so. The county also provides clear evidence to say that 2 is more efficient and runs at a lower cost than 3. On page 88 in the county B2 report, and using their midpoint modelling, the accumulated saving they identify for 2 unitaries is a modest 9 million. And rather horribly, they say that 3 unitaries have no saving at all. Indeed, they say there will be an accumulated cost of 146 million. Now, one of the big differences, Mr. Mayor, between the two reports is the disaggregation costs, which deal mainly with splitting up adults and children's social care budgets. These are big ticket items indeed. Yes, life and death items. These two budgets consume £700 million every single year, some 2/3 of the entire 1.1 billion spend of the county. The District and Boroughs report on page 54 suggests that the cost of disaggregating this huge spend from one county operation into two unitary operations will be just £8.1 million each year. That's only 1.2% of that total 700 million. That seems way too low to me. Disaggregating it to three councils, they say, will cost 12.2 million a year, which gives a breakage cost of about 1.7%. These cost estimates seem way too low to me. The county, which has the experience of actually running the service, agrees and says that that's a serious underestimate. They put the disaggregation costs shown on page 88 at some 3 to 4 times more. Perhaps the county figure is too high, but I'm convinced that the District and Boroughs report has it way too low. Whatever the truth of that one item, it is absolutely clear that 3 will be more expensive than 2. Now, having lost the financial debate, the District and Boroughs report tries to build a case to say that there are 3 natural clusters or economic clusters in Surrey. I have to say that I simply don't buy that argument. Surrey is full of thriving and disparate towns and communities. Some are bigger than others, but I don't accept that they fall neatly into 3. Take just one example. On page 44 of our papers, the D&B report uses data from the 2021 census to show commute patterns. With a graphic showing a series of ticks in boxes, the commuting patterns, hey presto, show 3 economic clusters, all so neat. But I'm very skeptical about this. For instance, what it does not mention is that also according to the 2021 census, nearly half of the population in Waverley aged over 16 years and in employment work mainly from home. So they don't figure in this data at all. I think the data is very suspect. I believe the reality is that the leader of the council and many others were predisposed to having 3 unitaries for whatever reason, whimsical, political or social. They have not built a financial case to support that proposition, but they then try to convince us of the natural existence of 3 over 2 unitary areas. Well, Mr. Mayor, I don't buy it. I'll be voting for 2, and I support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor MacLeod, followed by Councillor Weldon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The first paragraph of the paper we've been given tells us that there's public concern about lack of neutrality, if you like, in the way the D&Bs have presented their report. It then goes on to tell us that what the public is concerned about really is a lack of data to support some of the statements in the report. Now, I actually talked to quite a lot of members of the public, and I haven't picked up any of this concern at all. So that worries me slightly. And what also worried me is that, and what I would ask Councillor Austin to do, is provide the data necessary to substantiate her statement that there's this public concern. Because if she's going to criticise the D&Bs for operating like that, she shouldn't be operating like that herself. So it should be good enough to give us the data that supports her contention that there's public concern. I haven't seen it. I must talk to different people from Councillor Austin, so perhaps you could help us with that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Weldon, followed by Councillor Merriweather.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am strongly opposed to this amendment for the very simple reason that the argument is that the proposal from county best fulfills the criteria from government. That is not so. The first 2 criteria specified in the letter from government are completely ignored. Those are: proposals should be for sensible economic areas and should be for a sensible geography. If you combine those 2 and look at economic geography, there is no way in which a 2 unitary authority can fulfill those 2. How is a 2 split to be devised? On a vertical basis or horizontal? If we go for a split down the middle, we end up with one unitary running from Spelthorne to Haslemere, which really doesn't make sense. And in addition, you have the complication that on top of the problems inherited from Woking, we inherit problems from Spelthorne. That doesn't make sense at all. If, on the other hand, you look for a split horizontally, the north of Surrey is very different to the south of Surrey, and furthermore, in the south, there are no east-west transport links, or very poor east-west links. I cannot see that on economic geography grounds, a two unitary split makes any sense whatsoever. On the other hand, into three separate areas, I think it does make sense, and I think it's a compelling case in terms of economic geography, which the amendment completely ignores. Thank you.
Thank you. Leader, I know you're dying to speak, but I'm afraid clause 1510 prohibits you from speaking until the end of this debate when you get the chance to speak last before the proposer. Correct. I'm afraid, look at clause 1510. I actually sent it to you the other day because I knew you would be keen. Correct. The monitoring officer is about to explain it to you.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Council Procedure Rule 15.10 provides that if an amendment is moved, the mover of the original motion has the right of reply at the close of the debate on the amendment, but may not otherwise speak on it. And the mover of the amendment, Councillor Austin, shall have a right to reply immediately after the reply on the amendment by the mover of the original motion.
Yeah, I did actually send that to you a couple of days ago because I was aware it might be a problem. Councillor Merriweather, followed by Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Glad that's all clear. All right, I've got some concerns about some of the language used in the report, especially in Part A, its silence on social housing and the general oversimplification of the debt question. But the amendment asks us to support Part B2 rather than B1. Both Part Bs seek to answer the same question: does a 2 or 3 unitary model promise better value for our residents? And both Part Bs reports assess both options differently. I'm pleased to note that in their Part B, the D&Bs have focused on best value and used evidence from the 11 examples of LGR that have taken place across England since 2009, together with the independent expert analysis of PwC. The D&B's modelling has also benefited from the expertise of all 11 D&B Section 151s, including some with direct, relevant experience of precisely this kind of reorganisation. This compares starkly with the county's analysis in their Part B, which seems to prioritise money and power over value, and which seems to be built on less than convincing assumptions, to the extent that Surrey's even identified what those assumptions are. In fact, Surrey's financial analysis doesn't adequately explain even its so-called base case scenario, let alone its stretch case, or why the midpoint between them is a reasonable focus. It's equally short on detail for its assumed disaggregation costs and assumed reorganisation benefits. And it banks tens of millions of pounds worth of additional mysterious so-called annual transformation benefits, even in its base case scenario. Why does that matter? Well, each of the 11 D&Bs have already identified and banked in their own MTFPs what savings they reasonably can expect to balance their budgets for their local services. Surrey doesn't explain how or why it thinks it knows better. This is about both double counting and making unrealistic assumptions. The Spelthorne Best Value report is only the latest to caution against these, and we know that in this case, Surrey does have form. With cost pressures, for example, in the last 2 years alone, the county's underestimated the demand for adult care packages to the tune of £148 million through to 2930. And when it comes to overestimating its talents to make savings, just since 2021, Surrey's had to reverse over £350 million worth of efficiencies it planned through to 2930, which turned out to be undeliverable. And what about the inevitable transformation costs? While the text says they've been rolled up with the reorganisation costs, they don't seem to appear anywhere in that cost analysis tabulated around paragraph 57. The county's non-financial analysis also seems to be just as problematic. Take just for example the scoring system. It's contrived to mark its own subjective analysis of the unitary options, which isn't explained either in terms of the base scores or their so-called weighting. It speaks volumes that Surrey's Part B models 4 possible 2 unitary arrangements and a single unitary which has been ruled out, but the county's reduced all of the possible 3 unitary options to just 1 for consideration and neglected the existing disaggregation arrangements already in place for the county's 3 police divisions, 4 children's social care quadrants and 5 adult social care areas. Whether we progress to a 2 or 3 unitary will be for the government to decide, but it's the analysis we're considering now that will inform not only that decision, but others to come, like debt and the fair funding of our services going forward for years to come. And that's why robust and evidence-based forecasting matters now. I'm satisfied that a 3 unitary model offers best value for residents, and I really hope that whatever the government next decides, it will base its decision in the evidence, which I believe in this case is better reflected in the DNB's Part B submission. Thank you for bearing with me.
Thank you. Councillor Murray, followed by Councillor Keel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've always been extremely uncomfortable with the idea of creating massive councils which are too distant to know or care about their residents who live and work in the towns and villages of which Surrey is made of, as I know many of us here also do. And like Councillor Merriweather, I'm no accountant and have to take the figures at face value. Both of the plans seem to suggest support the evidence that 2 unitaries would be more efficient to create than 3. And the cost savings to the taxpayer would be sooner and longer lasting, with savings estimated over the first 5 years as 35 million for 2 against 19 million for 3. So why are some of the DNBs suggesting 3? They say they do not want to lose their local geographic and economic identity. Well, this sounds a sensible idea and seems to address my concerns. But who was ever identified as a resident of Waverley, Spelthorne, or Tandridge? Residents identify with the towns and villages in which they live and work, as Mr. Ruth stated at the beginning of this debate. Farnham Town Council is ready, willing and able to take on more local services and assets which are important to the residents of Farnham. And I am sure this is also the same in Godalming, Hazelmere and Cranley. The 2 unitary option actually recognises this and states specifically that they will deepen collaboration across Surrey's towns and villages and work actively with communities and town and parish councils. It will also need to act as a larger strategic authority and will not want to be dealing with local issues. As the others have said, the 3 unitary plan says nothing about how it will work with towns and villages. And by its very nature of wanting to keep local identity, in my opinion, they would be keen to hold on to local assets, services and decision making to maintain that identity. So, Mr. Mayor, do I want a unitary authority that is efficient and well funded? Yes, I do. Do I want a decision making that affects my town and villages to be made locally by people who know what the issues are? Yes, I do. So with this in mind, I think a 2 unitary option will be the best option and is the reason I will be supporting the motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I have Councillor Keel, followed by Councillor Williams.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I would also like to add my thanks to everyone who has worked on the LGR process so far, and in particular would like to thank our own officers for all the time they have spent on this endeavour. Our senior officers and their teams have been working incredibly hard at pace for a number of weeks, and I thank them for sharing the papers with us as soon as they were able to. I am supportive of the district and borough proposal of 3 unitaries and so cannot support this amendment. I support any system that brings power as close to the people as possible, and I do not think that the 2 unitary model would create a strong enough link between local communities and those who make decisions on their behalf on the services that are provided. We only need to look at the challenges of the current Surrey County Council administration in terms of providing SEND support, adult social care, highways infrastructure, to name but a few, to know that a larger authority isn't necessarily the best deliverer of services for local areas. A 2 unitary model with a proposition of 2 members per division would remove a huge swathe of representation from local communities in the form of current borough members. This means more residents per councillor, carrying more responsibility and an increased workload. I don't think there's a great sense of borough identity among residents. I do think that people have a strong affinity to their local area and expect their local area to be properly represented. I put it that 2 councillors within a 2 unitary model could not adequately represent the local concerns, and as Councillor Weldon noted, this would not make geographical sense. I am concerned as ever with widening participation and consider that this option could affect those in the future who may wish to stand for council, ensuring it remains largely the preserve of those who can afford to do the role, both in terms of time and money. A 3 unitary model with 3 members per division would be a more realistic workload and would preserve a stronger link between the new unitary and its councillors and, of course, our residents. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Williams, followed by Councillor Goodridge.
I do find it strange that there is this argumentation that 2 unitaries is so much better than 3. Presumably this argument, and it appears from what we're reading, the argument is all about economies of scale. Cost effectiveness, bigger is better. But we also know that bigger is not always better. There are these things called diseconomies of scale, and the remoteness of governance from the people governed is one of those diseconomies of scale. Already we have in the case of Surrey perhaps a critical mass which is actually too big to be truly efficient. We have a main headquarters of Surrey County Council over in Woodhatch in Reigate, which is, at some distance from those of us living, in the far west of the county. And of course, to mitigate that effect, that is why Surrey County Council has these things called area offices: Guildford, Woking, Leatherhead, Redhill, Epsom, Oxted, Uckfield. We are in a situation here where there is a little bit of red herring being created. Councillor Austin suggested that localism can be secured by unlocking further devolution, I think was what she said. And I entirely agree with that. I very strongly believe that once the dust has settled on this particular stage of the process, we do need to work very hard to secure that, because we haven't, seen any evidence that there is a real potential for building true localism in the new structure. So, in a sense, I guess what we need to be asking is why the creation of a council for us, for example, that stretches from the London Fringe to Hazelmere, a mega unitary that of this scale is more fit for purpose than a council that covers a more manageable area, a coherent area in terms of demography, local economy and travel to work area. So that is, I think, the key issue, the key
debate that we are addressing in terms of the amendment. 2 or 3. I think it is absolutely axiomatic that in the case of Surrey, in the case of the geography, in the case of the demographics that we face, that 2 is much better than 3, and I will not be supporting this amendment. I do apologise. May I just make it absolutely clear, Mr. Mayor, that 3 is better than 2, and that that is certainly what I will be supporting, and I will be opposing the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I thought a touch of Animal Farm was creeping in there. Councillor Goodrich, followed by Councillor Liz Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think Councillor Williams got it right the first time. It's ironic that when this council was set with 4 different rural district councils and urban district councils and so on, and I suppose was the midwife or maybe a mid-husband, and now I'm here as one of the undertakers. I will be supporting the amendment because I think it makes economic sense, as is shown in the report. And also, I take fairly seriously the interim plan paragraph 12 on page, it's difficult to tell because you've got page numbers overprinting on each other, but in the end 70s with the colourful chart, which is in effect rather like a risk assessment, when 3 unitaries is full of red and 2 unitaries is full of green and amber. And that seems to me a very important part of the argument. Personally, I think a north-south divide makes more sense. We're told that there's no transport east-west. Suppose if you're ignoring the M25, that's the case, or the A25. But the county has 2 different aspects. North of the M25 is very urban, South London, and so on, a very different character to those of us that live south of the M25, where it is rural. And I think there's a lot of argument to say that 2 unitary authorities with a north-south divide makes sense. How those councils, whether Guildford's in the north or the south or whatever, is something which could debate at a later stage. But I agree entirely with what Councillor Murray said. And it was very well argued, and I agree entirely with what he said, as well as Councillor Martin. And I think with the economies of scale and looking at the geography, that 2 unitary authorities, north-south, this isn't part of the debate today, whether it's to be north-south or east-west, makes sense and would work best, as we would be dealing with people with similar problems. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I have Councillor Liz Townsend, followed by Councillor Crowe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And first of all, I'd like to celebrate the fact that Councillor Austin is able to move this amendment. Unfortunately, the leader was not given the same courtesy this morning. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank officers and the leader for all his hard work and the officers for all of their hard work. I don't support this amendment. I firmly believe that a 3 unitary model is the best option for our residents. And it's true, we must first address the staggering amount of debt, largely left behind by reckless investment strategies, that has left some borough and district councils in precarious positions. But we're not discussing today the split. We're discussing the proposal of whether 2 or 3 unitaries are the best for our residents. And I must also say that perhaps we need to think about what devolution actually means, because devolution is not just about money, it's about how to enable more decisions to be made by those who know their areas best, leading to better outcomes and a more efficient use of resources. So it's not just about the bottom line, which we seem to be getting totally caught up on. And I'm quite surprised, you know, Councillor Austin, who was a staunch critic of collaborating with one little itty-bitty Guildford Council, now seems to be supporter of the biggest unitaries possible. I seem to remember her saying that collaboration was diluting local control, was imposing decisions from a higher level, and that we could be swallowed up in a larger, more centralised system. Well, I'm glad that she's thought about that perhaps a bit more. And also something that was said about collaboration with towns and parishes. The reason why Surrey has mentioned that is because it has hardly any, and that's why it's had to mention it. Whereas the boroughs and the districts collaborate with our towns and parishes all the time, so they didn't need to say it because it's always already deeply rooted and long established. I however, agree that with Councillor Austin on her previous opinion that bigger unitary authorities will dilute local identity and will stifle the local voice, particularly in planning matters. Having served as both a borough and a county councillor, I have witnessed the drawbacks of operating on a large scale, especially within the SEND environment. And I'm not sure some of my parents wouldn't welcome a more localised approach. And issues even as basic as grass cutting over large geographical rural areas seemingly becomes very difficult to manage efficiently. Earlier today, I heard proponents of the two unitary model claim that it would accelerate housing delivery. This reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of the barriers to building new homes. The real issue is that there is no effective mechanism to compel developers to build in line with local needs. It's not local planning policies or complex community infrastructure levy processes that have hindered our progress, but weak national policy, it's hindered progress for infrastructure, but weak national policy and the county council's failure to plan adequately for essential services that comes under their remit. And perhaps Councillor Austin would like to consider that some of this failure stems from being perhaps too large and too detached from the community that it serves. A three-unitary model would keep us closer to the communities that we serve, better reflect the diversity of housing and economic market areas, and the SHMAR, which is the South West Surrey Strategic Housing Market Area, and also the Functional Economic Area, which lumped Guildford, Waverley and also Woking together, was created by your party. And it wasn't the Leader Fortress building at all.
Can I ask you to finish, please?
Let's really help preserve the uniqueness of our areas and go for 3 unitaries. Thank you.
I have Councillor Crowe, followed by Councillor Beaman.
True.
Thank you very much. I shall not be supporting the amendment tabled. I believe democracy is best served at the most local level possible, and I therefore believe that democracy will be served best by the 3-unitary model. Bigger is not necessarily better, as has been outlined so articulately tonight by colleagues. For those who remember E.F. Schumacher, small is beautiful.
Thank you for that small and beautiful debate. Councillor Beaman, followed by Councillor Hyman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I think we're forgetting something here. The decision whether it's going to be 2 or 3 unitaries is not ours to make. It'll be finally decided by central government. Therefore, shouldn't central government be presented with both the 2 and 3 unitary options? By voting for this particular amendment, you're ruling out even denying the 3 unitary option being reviewed. So therefore, I shall be voting against this amendment.
Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, well, I think in essence, I agree with what Councillor Munro said at the very beginning, and in respect of the importance of the strategic mayoral authority, and it's very important for residents to know what's going on with that. One of the big issues that I've got here, this should all be about what it's going to do for residents. and how it's going to improve things for residents, and it should be about involving residents. And if you look at the Surrey County Council's submission, it really doesn't. I mean, it pretends that there's been engagement. It said, well, we went and met some people at a forum with the, you know, with the health. Health and firemen and whatever it happened to be, but there's been no engagement with us in Surrey whatsoever, no engagement whatsoever with residents, as far as I know. We've had no opportunity because we've had no information out of them as to what their plan was. I mean, they had their level 2 devolution framework agreement some time ago. We've had no one really saying to us, this is what's already agreed, and this is what would be happening, explaining, you know, what the impacts of that agreement will be, because that's what this is supposedly based upon. I am pleased that Surrey at least do give us some disadvantages and tell us what the disadvantages are, because Waverley's, or the district, doesn't actually mention a disadvantage. It just tells us of all the wonderful advantages, and any resident reading what they've got in front of us would think that that's the normal fluff. There's no information in it. There's no evidence. I have absolutely no confidence whatsoever that the minister is going to make a decision based on evidence, because there isn't any. How's he going to do so? Look at, as others have said, the disparate information on the finances from the two councils. I don't know whether that's Surrey's fault for not giving the districts and boroughs the information they need. I suspect that might be the case. But when you look at the differences in the figures that we've got, I wrote them down and went through and compared them. I did work out what, you know, I mean, we're going to be able to get an extra 2.5% if we become a unitary. The unitary authorities can stick an extra 2.5% on the tax bill. Wonderful for residents, isn't it? Immediately, residents have got to pay a lot more. 2.5% of $1 billion is 25 million, not 2.5 million. However you look at it, stick your calculator out. We can argue about it later, but if you think that that this is only about 2.5 million, it's going to cost residents 25 million. There's no evidence whatsoever that we're going to get savings. There's no assurance that for residents. They've seen elsewhere in government how when the government shifts things around, it costs an awful lot of money. Is it 70, 100 million pounds it could end up costing for this reorganisation? And it's going to cost residents 25 million pound a year. What are they going to get? Well, nothing. It looks like it's mainly politics here. It's here so that the counties and the government can take control of compulsory purchase orders, so they don't have to get the authority of the districts and boroughs anymore to carry out compulsory purchase. More power to the centre. It certainly isn't anything to do with giving residents more power. I agree with Councillor Murray in respect to town councils, but that's not allowed. We should perhaps be far on and being a Blackwater Valley unitary. That's not allowed. There's no scrutiny of this. It's not clever, but if we are going to be going for something, we need to get as close to the residents as possible. And I think that's with 3 rather than 2, because the CEO of Surrey actually wants just 1 unitary, and we've got to avoid that like the plague. I'm afraid that's what's up their sleeve. So 3 is, I think, the way I'm looking at the moment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Barker-Lomax.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Munro, for your comments regarding debt, with which I fully agree. Given the delta in the savings for the taxpayer between 2 and 3 unitaries, already referred to by Councillor Martin, it seems self-evident that we should reorganise into 2 unitaries, and therefore I will support the amendment. However, given that Guildford Borough Council is under investigation for fraud and embezzlement, that Woking Borough Council has 2.2 billion debt, that Spelthorne has 1 billion of debt, namely 10,000 per resident, my profound concern is that by unifying Waverley with, amongst others, Guildford, Woking or Spelthorne, our constituents will be saddled with huge legal bills to fight Guildford Borough Council's legal cases, and with ruinous financial bills to cover Woking's or Spelthorne's massive debts.
Thank you. I have Councillor Higgins, and then I have no more hands so far. Another one has appeared.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Now, there are 3 certainties in life: death,
taxes and the Conservatives opposing anything put forward by this
Can I
council.
just stop you there, please? The Chief Executive would like to clarify something.
I'm sorry, councillors. Just to clarify, following Councillor Bartholomew's remark, Guildford Borough Council is not under investigation for fraud and embezzlement. There is no ongoing investigation into Guildford Borough Council, particularly not on those grounds. Thank you.
I have Councillor Higgins, followed by Councillor Long.
Thank you, Mayor. Now, unless I've been having a bad dream, I'm pretty sure that pretty much every meeting within this council chamber, the opposition have always stated that our work with Guildford Borough Council was a merger and that they were opposed to it. Now, the opposition seems to have a thirst for working with other borough councils. Despite our proposal, the council's proposal, original motion, to have 3 unitary councils with a smaller number of borough councils, the opposition actually want us to merge, I'll use their words, with more borough councils. They actually want us not only to put us in with debt-ridden Woking, they want to put us in with debt-ridden Spelthorne as well. Now, the opposition have also stated tonight that 2 unitary councils will make more savings than 3 unitary councils. However, for the last few years, they've opposed any cost sharing between Waverley and Guildford Borough Council. And in fact, they claimed that working with Guildford Borough Council hasn't produced any savings, despite an independent report confirming there's been hundreds of thousands of pounds of savings. The reality is that the opposition actually don't know what they stand for. And that is why we can't put any weight behind this amendment. And as a result, I'll be voting against it.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Long, followed by Councillor Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to pick up on the comment by Councillor Austin relating to localism and her observation that 3 unitary authorities of 400,000 as opposed to 2 of 600,000 would not make a great deal of difference in terms of localism. To my mind, this is not about numbers, but a question of character. The districts and boroughs in the north of the county have been likened in part, Appendix B1 of the report, to the London boroughs. Having worked in Staines for many years, I agree with this wholeheartedly. The character of Staines is very far removed from Elstead and Pepperharrow, for which I was elected to represent. The new unitary authority will be responsible for education, a subject very close to my heart, and nowhere would the difference in character be more apparent than in the nature of the schools which will come under these unitary authorities. You will find very, very few of the tiny schools that we have so many of in Waverley and the more rural parts of the county, in those counties with which we would very likely end up, those districts and boroughs with which we would very likely end up being combined if we were to go for a 2 authority model.
Thank you. Councillor Atkins, and then I have no more hands. Yes, Ken Reid.
Page 63.57 states the combined forecast budget gap of 12 authorities will be 300 million by 2029-30 with a collective debt of 5.5 billion. It's actually a disgrace. The bottom line is incredibly important. For general context, 5.5 billion could pay for 100,000 nurses, or 200,000 teachers, or 50,000 police. It could pay for the build of 12 hospitals, probably only one if it was built by Waverley, or cover the entire UK roads maintenance budget for a year. It matters. Taxpayers deserve better. Forget all the nonsense politicking. It's clear that some authorities do a bad job. So for me, the least we have, the better.
Thank you. Councillor Ken Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've got 2 opposing views here, one represented by B1 and one represented by B2. And a number of speakers have taken some of the reports, depending on which side of the debate they sit, and said, right, well, this report clearly shows this. I'm going to go into, and like you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not a big user of social media, but I have heard a lot about things like fake news. And unfortunately, I do have some experience in business of doing options appraisals and using option appraisal frameworks. And I must admit that, to my mind, the options appraisal on pages 75 to 77 of the Surrey County Council report just doesn't follow the standard norms of producing that. So it's been produced to give the result you want to see. So I certainly, Councillor Murray, do not take too much notice of this in Councillor Goodrich, because I think it's been fiddled, if I could dare to use that phrase, Mr. Mayor. I would not be even dreaming of supporting the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Earwaker.
So just following on from that last speaker, I noticed on page 75 to 77 that in a word that has been apologised for, I do believe that those numbers have been skewed in favour of a two unitary authority. So I won't be voting for the amendment.
Right, councillors, if we've all had our fill, I will call on the exec seconder if she wishes to speak, the leader to right of reply, and then the proposer to sum up. So, Councillor Coburn, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, as ever, I stand in this chamber disappointed. Councillor Clark, I resent what you say. I have never stood up in this council without speaking with sincerity. And I will always speak with sincerity, whatever I say, and whether I disagree with you or not. It will be from a point of view of sincerity, not just to be awkward. I also rather dislike this attitude that somehow only a type of government can work out what is best for local people. I'm with Councillor Murray on this one. It's not what we actually put in place, it's how that's structured and how then that works down towards the smaller local authorities. And having read the two presentations and watched the debates, I'm quite convinced that Surrey has a better idea of how they're going to divide the authority into two and devolve power, or at least work closely with towns and parishes. I'm really worried about the smaller authorities. I don't think they will be efficient. And, you know, as somebody's touched on, if it's Woking, Guildford and Waverley, I mean, goodness knows what's going to happen. The idea that everybody out there is impressed with what we do with planning is just a myth, I'm sorry. We have been a failing borough in planning for years, and we cannot get round that. So, you know, to say that what we need is smaller boroughs so that we can then, or smaller authorities, so that we can then work better on our planning services is just nonsense. I work very closely with Surrey. I'm a trustee of the Ridgeway School, which is a school for children with severe learning difficulties. And I'm also a trustee of a home in Farnham for people with all sorts of handicaps. Used to be just physical, now it's absolutely everything. And I understand the difficulty of these services and the sheer size of the budgets needed. And I cannot see that divvying up this responsibility is going to provide anything like a better service. Yes, the service at the moment needs to be improved, but it's not going to be improved by further watering it down and having three lots trying to do this really complicated delivery of service. Anybody who's worked with either the adult services or, as I say, with the SEND pupils, and I mean worked, It's very easy in this chamber to throw it out as a sort of, oh, look at this, you know, I know all about it. If you actually work with it, you see there's a lot of people at all levels trying desperately hard to get this all to work. So I am a bit like Councillor Atkins. I'm very concerned about the bottom line, because I feel if we don't get the finances right, we won't get anything else right. And I think the two the two authority works. I don't know, like everybody else, quite how it should be divided up. That's not for tonight's debate, but I am quite convinced that we will get better value if we have well-organised, larger authorities that then work with the towns and parishes. And I have worked for 40 years for Farnham, and I'm not giving up now. There are lots of people who are going to be there and will provide that real local voice. And believe you me, I'll be at the forefront as usual, shouting my head off for Farnham. But I will do it from a point of view of sincerity, Councillor Clark, not just to be awkward. So I fully support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Martin and others, frankly, over the last few days, I'm very glad that you've spoken about predisposition before the evidence. And just on that point, I'll flag to you, and there's a published article on this, Councillor Tim Oliver, the leader of the County Council, gave a speech to the County Council's network, which he chairs, on December the 20th, 2024, 4 days after the white paper was issued, and without a shred of evidence or discussion, said that he favoured 2 unitaries, which is where we are now. So, I mean, I think it's just, let's just put that in context. So, Councillor Martin, on your other points, the data 100% shows that many people work from home. That's why we said that most people work within their boroughs. It is literally the third line on page 44. Councillor Goodridge, yes, shockingly, the County Council believe their own assumptions when doing their own scoring, validated in most cases by nobody other than themselves, unlike the district and borough proposals. Councillor Barker-Lomax, your point is also confirming that you are happy to repeat unsubstantiated numbers and just take them as read without further scrutiny. Councillor Austin, Woking, Spelthorne, Runnymede, all run by your party during the period that debts were racked up and in the top end of debt to council tax ratio in the UK. I think they're the top 3. Birmingham might be in there somewhere. Some of us are here having to ensure that we're not exposed to the debts of those councils that your group used to run. And I assure you, we do take that very seriously. It's the sort of thing that keeps me up at night, along with the figures about how local government funding is entirely broken, frankly, none of which has been dealt with by any of this process. As I'm sure and hope you already know, towns and parishes can already do all the things they need or want to, pretty much, with the legal powers and uncapped precepting that they have. And as I said to those councils in Waverley today, the limit is in reality their ambition and capacity. This is why Godalming Town Council, which I'm honoured to lead alongside a number of the other members in this room, runs our town's youth services, because guess what? County packed up shop years ago and never came back and had no care about the issues in Godalming whatsoever. So far away from Reigate, a big council that forgets the local. We see and we remember. The Surrey County Council document is a frankly facile glance over the main issues. Its assumptions are both unrealistic and over-optimistic. The Spelthorne report from MHCLG just this week specifically cautions officers and members about over-optimism of forecasting and overstating of benefits. Woking and Spelthorne residents have seen that hubris before. I suspect Surrey residents are starting to see it too, by the way, and are now dealing with the consequences. And of course, we are now having to deal with the consequences. We are having to deal with those issues. Because at the core of this, if you speak to a family who's got an SEN child, if you speak to somebody who's trying to care for an elderly parent, if you look at the roads in the county, if you look at any of the services that they do, and then you look at things like the transformation projects that they're talking about just for their council now, let alone the ones they're proposing in here, which they keep, by the way, bridging with reserves to the point that they're at 14 days of operational non-ring-fenced reserves. This is a council that is saying we should trust all of their numbers validated by nobody other than them. That is a ridiculous proposition. The districts and boroughs submission is considerably more robust. Just to echo the point that Councillor Townsend also made, the districts and boroughs, Councillor Murray, work with the towns and parishes every single day. I spend most of my day actually talking about town and parish business because it's the most local and the most important to residents. It is also in places like Godalming, an area where we've had to step up and take on services that the county have abandoned. And that is an increasingly common trait across those towns and parishes. So for me, it is in fact fundamental that we throw out this amendment and focus on a robust, genuine, thoughtful, local process that 3 unitaries, imperfectly certainly, because we've done this in 7 weeks, tries to do. And members, I beg you to throw out this amendment.
Councillor Austin, you may sum up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We must support the Surrey submission. It is the more coherent, well-reasoned document, and it best answers the requirements put to us by government. I do agree with Councillor Munro that mayoral strategic authorities and how this happens is absolutely key. For example, the District and Borough report makes a big deal of economic clusters. Although it's useful to look at this, delivering economic growth, as with other key areas, will be the mandate of the mayoral authority, who will have strategic oversight of all Surrey. For me, the overriding reasons to support 2 unitaries are to do with the debt and also to do with ensuring the delivery of the core services. That £700 million budget, which will affect children, our young people and our vulnerable. We must not get that wrong. Councillor Townsend and Councillor Follows, I'm sure Councillor Oliver will be happy to forward you Surrey's constitution on amendments, as you both seem a bit confused today. Once again, Councillor Townsend, do Waverley Training Services do a course on economics, I wonder? I repeat, I have always been a fan of vertical integration, as that delivers efficiency. We should have done it back in 2020. Lateral integration, like collaboration, has proved a waste of everyone's time. Councillor Higgins, we maintain our view. We know exactly what we stand for. We stand for the residents of Waverley's interests, finance and efficiency. That all matters. Once again, Councillor Clark, more marine metaphors and no detailed analysis for your residents. Councillor Nicholson, all councils UK-wide which have unitarised are progressing and none have reverted back. I mean, I think that says a lot. Councillor Keel, Councillor Follows, on the issue of number of councillors, I'm a mum of 4, I work, I do it, so your argument does not hold. Crucially, the D&B report fails to acknowledge the work that a single county councillor already does across a whole division, including the rural ones. The workload should be reflected in the job description and allowances, sure, but with this, the role of a unitary councillor will be more rewarding, as they will have greater ability to effect meaningful change in their area. Councillor Mountain, thank you for your salient points. I also don't buy it. I have to agree. Councillor MacLeod, what the public concern is, well, perhaps you haven't looked in the press or Facebook or any social media, or spoken to many of the councillors across Surrey today, or maybe the one that called for the leader's resignation in the council meeting today. Councillor Merriweather, I will be placing my priority on the numbers from the council who are delivering the vast majority of the services right now. The district and borough report is shorter on detail about costs, and certainly the assessment of risk is far better explored in the Surrey version. I will also not be taking advice from a Waverley executive which chose to ignore £1.8 million of costs at the recent budget in order to make it balance. Transformation costs. Councillor Murray, I totally agree with you. The Surrey report has a great deal more to offer towns and parishes. In fact, all of my council group, I could not agree with you all more on the costs and issues you've raised. Finally, Councillor Follows, if you take our residents' interests seriously, you should not be supporting lumping us in with Woking. You'd rather do that, put our residents at risk, than risk losing a political foothold. I know it's been a tough week for you. Councillor Tim Oliver today said you should do some more training because you seem to keep forgetting about the £150 million of reserves. In summary, please, I just commend you. The Surrey report's the most sensible one. I think we should be going with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We now come to the vote. Is anyone calling for?
I am, of course, calling for a recorded vote, Mr. Mayor, and I am sure I have a number of people who would like to second that. There we go. Thank you.
First bit of cross-party you've had this year.
Oh, no, we had one earlier.
Very well. Could we have a roll call, please?
Councillor Atkins,
Are you for or against?
For.
Councillor Austin,
For.
Councillor Barker Lomax,
For.
Councillor Beeman,
Against.
Councillor Busby,
Against.
Councillor Cavalieri,
Against.
Councillor Clark,
Against.
Councillor Coburn,
For.
Councillor Crowe,
Against.
Councillor Davidson. Not here. Councillor Denis. Councillor Deuce,
Against.
Councillor Earwaker,
Against.
Councillor Fairclough,
Against.
Councillor Follows,
Against.
Councillor Gale,
Abstain.
Councillor Goodridge,
For.
Councillor Hess,
Against.
Councillor Higgins,
Against.
Councillor Hosseini,
For.
Councillor Hyman,
Against.
Councillor Keel,
Against.
Councillor Lawton,
Against.
Councillor Long,
Against.
Councillor MacLeod,
Against.
Councillor Martin,
For.
Councillor Merriweather, Councillor Murraylees,
Against.
Councillor Morrison,
Against.
Councillor Monroe,
For.
Councillor Murray,
For.
Councillor Nicholson, Councillor Ken Reid,
Against.
Councillor Ruth Reid,
Against.
Councillor Raleen, Councillor Paul Rivers,
Against.
Councillor Penny Rivers,
Against.
Councillor Rubini,
Against.
Councillor Spence,
Against.
Councillor Staunton, Councillor Steiger, Councillor Sullivan,
For.
Councillor Liz Townsend,
Against.
Councillor Philip Townsend, Councillor Ward,
Against.
Councillor Weldon,
Against.
Councillor White, Councillor Wicks, Councillor Williams.
Against.
Thank you.
Councillors, the results are 11 in favour of the amendment, 34 against and 1 abstention. The amendment therefore fails and we return to the normal debate. For those who may have forgotten what happened an hour and a half ago, the leader introduced his motion, and I now, the seconder reserved his right to speak later, so I now throw the floor open. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Coburn. To have my name mentioned twice is indeed praise, but I'll try and not let it go to my head. Because I do find it difficult sometimes to be sincere when motions or amendments are put forward with such irregularity. But I will now accept Councillor Coburn's invitation to be sincere. Yesterday, we witnessed the Minister make a statement to Parliament that he is appointing or minded to appoint commissioners to run some of the services at Spelthorne Council. To the outside observer, this seems strange timing for him to make the statement, given that this is the very week we are submitting proposals to his department. Some of us this evening will be and have been tempted to discuss the high levels of debt around the county. But our main focus, I think, should be on the long-term structure, which would truly reform local government. So putting the debt issue to one side for a moment, I wish to focus on what we're being asked to debate this evening. Both reports recognise that 2 and 3 unitaries are going to save money, but the evidence within the D&B report clearly points that a 3 unitary model being the most effective for our area, not just for financial reasons, but for non-financial reasons as well. The County Council's performance and financial unsustainability is a perfect example that big is not always best, and that smaller and more flexible councils can understand their areas and respond to the needs of their residents more effectively. LGR is a hugely costly and disruptive process that could simply create cloned versions of the County Council. There is only one thing worse, as I said earlier, than a dysfunctional council, and that's 2 of them. LGR risks reinforcing the status quo by creating suboptimal organisations which fail to bring about a step change in public service reform. The outcome could be driven by risk aversion rather than innovation. The greatest risk is losing the momentum created by the white paper and settling for change, which really isn't change. Instead, LGR must focus on meaningful renewal and reform, driving economic growth, improving public well-being, and restoring faith in local government. The D&B report backs flexibility over the 500,000 population size limit. Government should look beyond the lure of theoretical cash savings set out in the county's report and listen to the more ambitious proposals from the smaller councils. A place-based approach is vital, as is understanding that places all need different approaches. So in conclusion, it follows that the differences in size and scale are a necessity and not simply an indulgence of parochial interest. At no time has the government commissioned independent research to support their preference for large unitary councils of 500,000 people, and has done no analysis of its own. So hopefully it will look at the analysis of the evidence which is clearly set out in this excellent report from the D&Bs, which I will be supporting wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Thank you. I see just Beeman, Councillor Beeman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I personally have long held the view that Surrey County Council was a Victorian creation that had long outlived its original purpose and should be abolished and replaced by a number of unitary authorities. Local government reorganisation is not something that should be taken lightly. The budgets of many local authorities exceed the budgets of many private companies. The decisions taken by local authorities affect everybody's lives. Now, it would have been better to start with a clean sheet of paper and start again, but the restraints set by central government meant we were far too restrictive in that regard, so we've got what we've got. Act in haste, repent at leisure would seem appropriate. Decisions that are about to be made in the next few weeks will have financial, economic and social consequences for the next 50 years. In contrast, I understand that the current central government review of social care and its funding, which is one of the most significant issues facing all local authorities, will not be reporting until 2028, to allow sufficient time for all the required information to be collected and properly analysed. What a contrast. Although I'm a Waverley councillor, I was elected as a Farnham resident councillor, and now I shall be voting, based on what I believe to be in the best interests of Farnham. To start with, the issue of how debt should be dealt with remains unresolved. It seems clear that this debt is not going to be written off until an acceptable resolution is agreed. Then I can't see how any local government reorganisation can proceed. Surrey is, however, already recognised as a special case, and I have to assume that the debt position will be dealt with one way or another. I do, however, have a great fear that in order to resolve the debt problem, the only way forward would be for Surrey to be treated as a very, 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 very special case and allowed to become a single unit authority with strategic mayoral powers. Even if such a fate can be avoided and either 2 or 3 unit authorities are created, I have serious concerns over what powers would be held by the strategic mayoral authority. We could find ourselves in a situation where 2 or 3 unitary authorities are effectively just larger districts and boroughs, which additionally have social care perhaps and perhaps some highway powers transferred to them. If strategic decisions on matters like highways and planning were to be taken at Surrey level, then it is questionable how democratic and accountable these would be if the only direct elected member to this strategic authority was a mayor. Also to be considered are the higher housing targets that have been set for all local authorities, apart from Waverley's increased housing target, both Woking, increased from 436 to 795, and Guildford, increased from 743 to 1102, have also higher housing targets. Since any proposed unitary with which Waverley is involved is likely to include Woking and Guildford, this could well result in even higher housing provision being needed in Waverley, since the precedent has already been set that Woking's unmet housing needs should be provided in Waverley. It will no doubt be argued that the higher housing targets for Waverley itself, given infrastructure constraints, would preclude it from being required to provide any additional unmet housing need for Woking, or Guildford for that matter. Can, however, one be certain that Waverley would not be required to provide for any unmet housing need in Woking or Guildford? Any further increasing housing target for Waverley would inevitably result in more planning applications for significant residential development in Farnham and places like Alford, given that much of the remainder of Waverley is currently protected by Greenbelt and, as they now call it, national landscapes. I remain personally committed to the creation of unitary authorities as the way forward to delivering efficient and effective local government. There are, however, so many unresolved issues and uncertainties that require further information to be collected and subjectively analysed for any new unitary authorities can be successfully established. Whether this can be realistically achieved within such a tight timescale is, to say the least, a challenge. After very careful consideration, I shall be supporting the district and borough proposal establishment as the best option forward at this stage. But remember, it's central government who decides the final decision. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Denis, followed by Councillor Weldon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's been a very long day, having started the first meeting discussing this at 10 o'clock. But having done the first meeting, and Paul will be very pleased, someone brought to my attention a post that Councillor Follows had put out, and I'll just give a few lines from it, if I may. So there's a bit of an introduction, and it says, this was the vote on the main matters at the County Council. 2 unitaries, 438 against 27. 3 unitaries, the district and borough bid, 467 against 0. A couple of paragraphs down, it says, all councillors of all parties voted for the 3 unitary plan put forward by the district and boroughs. This is not true. I will read out what the recommendation was that we voted. So for that one where it said everybody voted for the 3 unitaries, it says, note the district and the borough councils authored Part B, Annex 8. It did not say you voted for or against your views on 3 unitaries. So that is misleading and totally inaccurate.
That is, can I just stop you there? That may or may not be true, but we are actually debating whether the executive send a letter to the government or not. I think Councillor Follows' posts outside this are perhaps not that relevant.
But it's referring that we have voted for a 3 unitary, and that is not true.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor. We aren't the County Council.
Okay, can we cool this one, please? This is getting quite personal and it's getting off the topic. Have you done, Councillor Denis?
I think my point's been made. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Weldon.
Thank you again. I've already made my main points. I'll be extremely brief. I was really pleased earlier to hear Councillor Goodrich make the point, a very accurate point, that the northern parts of the county are very different to the south. They are closely aligned with London and effectively very different. So I think if his colleagues agree with him, then we'll probably all agreed that if there is a two unitary division, it's on the north and south basis. That leaves us with the question of the southern section, stretching from Farnham in the west right across to Tandridge in the east. I cannot see that makes any sense at all. I think an obvious thing then is to have the southern part divided into two, southwest and southeast, and therefore it follows that we really need a 3 division. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Williams, followed by Councillor Coburn.
I don't want to sort of repeat the debate that we've just had of 2 versus 3 local authorities, but I do think that, you know, we do need to welcome this once in a lifetime or once in a generation, I think, our opportunity to reform local government. I believe that the opportunity should be seized, and I think we have a sensible proposal in the very difficult circumstances in which we find ourselves in terms of proposing 3 unitary authorities. However, I do think it needs to be said that the whole process really should not have been rushed through as it is, and it should not be seen as a mere cost-cutting exercise. Yes, it is an opportunity to reshape local government. It could be an opportunity to make local government more efficient and put an end to the tensions and duplications that were created by local government reorganisation 53 years ago. But I think it should be an opportunity to re-examine the way in which local government is financed, reform the electoral system that elects our councillors, and empower those councils which are closest to the people who elect them, namely town and parish councils. But sadly, all this is off the agenda, and there is so little opportunity in the process to build in any consultation with the public in how they are to be governed. So there are lots of missed opportunities here. We need to focus on that over which we might possibly have some control over influence. And I do believe that we have the best of a bad job, and we will certainly, I will certainly be supporting the proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Coburn, followed by Councillor Merriweather.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Oh, I shall stand. I can't break a habit. I really feel we're just going around in circles here. We've all said it before. We've all heard it before. Is it still possible for a councillor to suggest that the vote be put? You know, I just feel, you know, we're getting off the point. We are where we are. We've got to do what we've got to do. There's no point in wringing your hands. You know, I've got no, what should we say, interest in this. I've no intention of standing. I have no intention of being the mayor. You'll be glad to know. So basically, you know, we've heard it all before. We've said what we think about 1. We've said what we think about 2. Can we not just put the vote and go home? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
By the general assent, I guess you must have a seconder somewhere in the room. Just looking to see whether it goes straight to the vote or whether the proposer gets the ability to sum up. And I am taking advice, so bear with me.
It's up to you.
Okay. Okay, everybody, we have had a little conference. We have a proposal to put it to the vote, which has been proposed and seconded. I will therefore put that to the vote without further discussion. Should that be carried, the proposer of the original motion has the right of reply, and then it goes to the vote, and that is it. So the vote before you, councillors, is that the question be now put. Can we do that electronically, please?
No, it's not set up.
No, it's not set up. Okay, we can do it by acclamation if you are happy with that, everybody. Do we have anybody wish to record a vote against?
Yes.
Be really unpopular.
Yes.
Where's the yes?
Councillor Hyman.
Councillor Hyman, thank you. Right, so
Well, I
that
would
vote
like
is
to put an
carried. So
amendment.
leader, you now have the ability to sum up, and we then put the motion to the council.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The SCC report does not deliver on the vast majority of the white paper, and it doesn't really consider anything beyond the fixation on population and on some of the finances. And where it is considering the finances, it marks its own homework repeatedly without validation from anyone else. The districts and borough proposal does not do that and seeks, where possible, to use evidence to guide its decision-making and its conclusions. Councillor Beeman really said what I've actually been thinking on this. Had this started with a blank sheet of paper, with no default rules, with no red line about what Surrey was based on what it was in the 70s, with no standing issues such as debt, I actually think we could have done something really and truly great with this. I really, really do. And actually, that's one of the most disappointing things about this whole process is actually the lost opportunity in it being so rigorously guided through certain types of rules and through certain types of norms that have just been locked in since the 70s. I'm sure there are lots of reasons why that is. Some of it might be about time, but honestly, that's the bit I'm finding genuinely most disappointing. And, you know, in this case, we're not even doing it how most other people would do a unitary construction over the course of 2 or 3 years. We're doing it in sort of 2 or 3 months. And that is incredibly dangerous. I do want to just repeat one of my opening statements, though, about debt. None of these unitaries can be incorporated on day one at present without a plan to resolve the debt issues of Woking, Spelthorne and others. In practice, everything we say here about these bids and specific proposals in the future presumes those elements are sorted out first, because no triple, double or single unitary can absorb any or part of the portion of the debt without it being unviable at the point of incorporation. It can't exist. So these must be dealt with first. So any thoughts of, oh, we can't be proposing a triple unitary or a Western unitary because it includes Woking or Spelthorne. I mean, don't get me wrong, guys, are the reasons that Woking and Spelthorne are in those situations. I'm just one of the people having to help pick up the mess. But ultimately, you can't bring these unitaries into effect without a plan to deal with the debt. And I just want to be really clear about that, that anything that anybody is talking, county or us, is post-debt resolution. That I just need to repeat that fundamentally. Councillor Dinas, you might want to read my post. I'm very clear about the noting point. And, you know, had I been able to actually put an amendment to the county, they would have actually not been quite so cowardly and been forced to actually commit a position to advise their cabinet in an allegedly advisory debate on this subject, instead of just proposing to note stuff. I will just be clear that in that, the majority of councillors noted to support noted the report to for 2 unitaries, and all councillors noted the report on 3. I'm coming back to the main point.
Yeah,
it was mentioned in the room. I thought I'd just clarify. I want to just spend the last minute talking to Councillor Munro, because actually the bit about strategic is a bit that there's a reason we haven't spoken about it. And that's because we obviously have to go through this unitarisation process first before we get to devolution. And what it's meant is we've had conversations with all of the other areas around us about that mayoral footprint. Because I'll be honest right here, I don't think Surrey's big enough to be a proper strategic authority. I think actually, if you're going to bother with this properly, you need to look at the southeast of England or something like that to be really relevant here. Because we are not Manchester with a serious urban core and a rural periphery that you can do an efficient strategic authority for things like transport and even potentially fire and police and so on. I don't think it quite works. And actually, the government have not told us how their mayoral model really transplants to a very differently constructed south of England. And that's still the discussion that's being had. And we'll see in this process what happens in Hampshire and the Sussexes and a few other places, because likely the government is going to grant their requests. And, you know, Surrey, not being frankly the most attractive partner at the dance at the moment because of all of its baggage, we are going to be Surrey by ourselves, and that's not going to be our choice. Mr Mayor, I commend the recommendations to the council and executive.
Thank you, Leader. Since it's a long time since it first popped out, I think it's probably pertinent that I read it to you all so you know what you're voting on.
And may I call a recorded vote, of course, Mr Mayor, sorry.
Okay. Can you put it on screen? Okay, we will have the motion put up on the screen to save my tortured tonsils. That is part A on the board. I think part B is perhaps the more relevant. Do we have that?
No, it's not more relevant. It's as it was. It's
Okay.
not been amended in the paper. It's in your papers.
I will read it to you. It will be easier. What councillor follows proposed was that council notes the letter from government on the 5th of April 2025, inviting all councils in Surrey to submit an interim plan for local government reorganisation by 21st March 2025 and a full proposal by 9th May 2025, brackets Appendix 2. And this is perhaps where councillors appear to differ, that council considers the joint interim local government reorganisation plan in Appendix 1 and recommends to the executive that Part A and Part B1, being proposals of the districts and boroughs for 3 unitary authorities, be submitted by the leader of the council to the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government by the 21st of March 2025. That, councillors, is what you are voting on. Could we have a roll call, please?
Councillor Atkins. Councillor Austin.
Against.
Councillor Barker Lomax.
Against.
Councillor Beeman.
For.
Councillor Busby.
For.
Councillor Cavalieri.
For.
Councillor Clark.
For.
Councillor Coburn.
Against.
Councillor Crowe.
For.
Councillor Davidson. Councillor Denis. Councillor Deuce.
For.
Councillor Earwaker.
For.
Councillor Fairclough.
For.
Councillor Follows.
For.
Councillor Gale.
Abstain.
Councillor Goodridge.
Against.
Councillor Hess. Councillor Higgins.
For.
Councillor Hussaini.
Against.
Councillor Hyman.
Abstain.
Councillor Keane, not here. Councillor Keel.
For.
Councillor Lawton.
For.
Councillor Long.
For.
Councillor MacLeod.
For.
Councillor Martin.
Against.
Councillor Merriweather.
For.
Councillor Murleys.
For.
Councillor Morrison.
For.
Councillor Monroe.
Abstain.
Councillor Murray.
Abstain.
Councillor Nicholson. Councillor Ken Reid.
For.
Councillor Ruth Reid.
For.
Councillor Relene. Yeah. Councillor Paul Rivers.
For.
Councillor Penny Rivers. For. Councillor Rubini.
For.
Councillor Spence.
For.
Councillor Staunton. Not here. Councillor Steiger. Councillor Sullivan. Against. Councillor Liz Townsend.
For.
Councillor Philip Townsend. For. Councillor Ward.
For.
Councillor Weldon.
For.
Councillor White. For. Councillor Wicks. For. Councillor Williams.
For.
Councillors, the result of that vote is 33 for, 8 against and 4 abstentions. The matter is therefore carried, and with the exception of the executive who have a bit of work to do afterwards, I think you can all go home.